All right, folks, this is a treat on Healthcare Unfiltered. I'm really, really, really happy because I've been actually waiting to tape this episode for a while, and finally, I was able to get the one and only Stephanie Chuang on the Healthcare Unfiltered to talk about her journey, what she's doing now, and how she got where she is. Stephanie, welcome to the Healthcare Unfiltered. It's your first time. I promise you, it won't be the last, though.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll take you
Yeah.
up on it. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Really appreciate you coming on. And I came across who you are. It's been probably, over a year and a half, just really through social media, where I came across your platform and what you're doing for patients. And then I got to know you and understand, that you were a patient with cancer at some point. And thankfully, you are cured, but you have taken that to heart and you wanted to help others. And I want to make sure we spend a lot of time explaining to folks who are listening how this actually came about. But let's start about, just who's Stephanie Tron?
Yeah. Where do I begin? The abridged version, I'm a Bay Area girl, left to go to journalism school at Northwestern, had decided I wanted to be a journalist, did that for over a decade. I was a TV news reporter. Was here in San Francisco reporting, and then that was when I got a diagnosis. I will say, fast forward, spoiler alert, yes, I'm doing well. I'm very grateful for that. I have a wonderful husband, three small kids, and still live in the Bay Area, so they couldn't get rid of me. But that's a little bit of who I am. I could go on for a lot longer, but I won't
Oh,
bore
and
you
we will,
with the
and we
details.
will, and we will, we will. That's this. The today's podcast is all about you. But journalism, what were you reporting on? Was it healthcare? What was the topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was doing both the general assignment, which is the day-to-day, news, but my love, and I was really lucky to get to do this, was called special projects. So that's really human interest pieces, right? Light investigative pieces, but really I've always had a passion for doing this, what you're doing, right? You're talking to a lot of people, uncovering, interesting things out of things that actually seem really ordinary. After spending so many years talking to so many people of all walks of life, from celebrities to politicians to your everyday person on the street, realize that you could throw a paper plane in any direction, and wherever it hit, there is an interesting story. You just have to ask the right questions.
Isn't that amazing? Like behind every person, there's a story, and
Yeah,
sometimes it's really about giving that person an opportunity to tell the story,
right.
which is part of what I love about what you're doing, which we will get there. Um, it's fair to say, you're living your life as a journalist. You're young, you're healthy. Probably the last thing on your mind that you'll be diagnosed with any cancer. How did this all come about?
Yeah. So I had been feeling very tired, but at the time, my, TV news job was pretty demanding. The hours were all over the place. We were going through a home renovation type thing, living there. I mean, there was a lot going on. 2 months from getting married in San Francisco. So I was just like, you know what? This is just part of being me right now. The one telltale sign, actually, later in retrospect, was my face was really large in the morning when I woke up. It kind of bloated, and then it would sort of narrow or thin down or dissipate as the day went on. Turns out it was because something was it was almost blocking the SVC. So the blood wasn't draining properly. That's the layman's version. Finally, I had this cough that was really foreign. And so I went to a same day care place, saw PCP, and she was like, "Oh, you're young, you're fine. It's nothing." She actually was like, "Oh, it's probably mono." And I was like, "That's so strange." But when she felt down around here, her demeanor completely shifted and changed. And she was like, "Well, why don't we get some blood tests going and maybe order some ultrasounds?" It was around 4:30 in the afternoon, late afternoon. I'm a reforming type A neurotic person. I can't wait around for that kind of stuff. And so um, I was supposed to wait 2 or 3 weeks for the ultrasounds, but there was a healthcare system down the hill from me. and it was X-ray first come first serve. So I went down, did that. A couple hours later, got a call that they needed an emergency CT scan. My heart dropped. Told my then fiance and sister. Told them it's nothing. It's fine, and just stay at your meetings and your work. And they came to be with me. And then after I got that scan done around 5 o'clock that day, so it was like 24 hours after the first visit, I got the call, and it was, "I'm so sorry, Stephanie, it's lymphoma."
Just
That was
from the
it.
CAT scan, they saw something obviously, but they
Yeah,
their suspicion was very high. It's lymphoma.
it was very high. Yeah, it was just very high, and I burst out crying. I remember being on the couch. It feels like 10 years ago and a day ago, sometimes at the same time, actually. And all I knew was that it was cancer, and it was just, yeah, it
Stephanie,
was
and
terrible.
I know this might get a little bit emotional, but that's okay. That's what makes us human, right? Did you, I mean, giving the diagnosis or something that serious on the phone, did you feel, was this something you really wanted to? I mean, versus, hey, come in tomorrow, let's talk about it. How did you feel?
It's a really interesting question because now and we'll talk more about the work later, but I've talked to hundreds of patients now at this point, and some people, it's actually pretty bifurcated in terms of half people are like, "I want to know now," and the phone call is the thing. If I'm being told on the phone, "Come in and let's chat," that's torturous as well, right? And other people want that face-to-face time. I think I was happy to, no, I mean happy, but I was glad, I guess, relatively speaking, to get that news as quickly as I did. But that moment, of course, was so isolating, and I was young at the time and just feeling pretty shattered. Yeah.
Well, you're still young, by the way, just for the record,
Uh,
as a
feels
note on the
different.
side. So they told you on the phone, how soon did you get in to see somebody to just go over what needs to be done next?
Yeah, so this is actually the start, really the genesis of what would become the patient story. Very privileged. I have a lot of privileges. As soon as we got the diagnosis, my now husband was off on his phone. We were contacting, or really he was, all of the doctor friends we had and knew, and all of his business, friends and colleagues who had contacts at the large institute. I mean, it was like really quick. But here, so I went to UC San Francisco, and one of his friends is a doctor there, not an oncology, but he knows the system. And so he was in our living room like an hour after I got that phone call that it was a lymphoma diagnosis. And he was like, "Look, I'm going to go to this other healthcare system and pick up the CD of the scan images." It was after hours. There's no way I could have gotten them. He said, "Go to the emergency department, because if you're going to try to make an appointment in oncology at UCSF, it's going to take a long time. So just go, get into the system." If I had not heard that from him, I don't know how much longer it would have taken. Unfortunately, as you know, the healthcare system is inundated. Oncologists are inundated with patients, and it was just incredibly helpful because then I was there. Yes, I waited 24 hours to actually get a room, but I was in. They got my, tests in. I was scheduled for biopsies right away, and it happened so quickly. But I will just really quickly say the reason why that was the genesis of the patient story. It actually, the first version of the name of the company was One David. And that was because that was the name of our friend, the doctor at UCSF. And I wanted to provide One David for everybody. It is shattering for anyone and all the loved ones around that person to get a diagnosis. And in the overwhelm, how are we supposed to know where to go, what questions to ask? The questions are, it's hard to get answers to, but also we don't know what we don't know. So having a David who was the ultimate navigator in such a murky, terrible time was the best thing that could have happened, not just to me, but to my family. And so I just wanted to be able to provide that for other people.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I think that the healthcare system, the process of entering the healthcare system is broken.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes knowing that person really helps. So you got in, they start, did additional tests, and then they found the actual lymphoma that you have, because as everybody knows who is listening, there are so many types of lymphomas out there. Um, you were told you needed chemotherapy. Um, A, how was your reaction? But B, how did you, at the time, you had work, you were about to get married. Like, how did you deal? Did you quit
Yeah.
your job? Like, I mean, because, and the reason I ask, Stephanie, is because sometimes people may still need to work. Like, it's not easy to say I'm
Yeah.
going to take like 6 months off and not work. Like, how did you deal with the logistics of life as you were getting embark on treatment?
Yeah, I mean, this is really when I talk about privilege, this is what I'm talking about. At the time, actually, I had already decided that in my news career, I wanted to shift a little bit. So I was still reporting, but I was creating a platform for storytelling that was supposed to, it was supposed to talk to people from different walks of life and encourage people to better understand one another, right? Instead of not understanding somebody else, but being like, oh, that's human. That's a very human person. I understand them more. So it was easy for me work wise to say, hey, this health thing is happening and I can't, work anymore. From a financial standpoint, I just didn't have to worry about that. And it's, I mean, even to this day, it's one of my biggest drivers is not understanding how people are able to do this and wade through everything that they have to go through. I fell into a really dark place after my diagnosis and going through treatment, and it was terrible. But, to your question, I didn't have to worry about the work thing. And then we just decided to postpone the wedding and call off the bachelorette party and all those things. And, but I didn't have to think about, hey, is my insurance going to cover this or this? How am I going to get to the treatment? I was 7 minutes from UCSF because I lived in a city. So there were so many things that was the first time I really put myself in the shoes as closely as I could anyway, to most Americans, more than not, who are experiencing those questions, A or B. Like, how can we, so it's limited in what I'm able to do, but everything that I can possibly do, I want to do to help other people.
It's fair to say that whenever you get any type of diagnosis of a life-threatening illness, no matter what the doctors will tell you, you do your own research. I mean, hey, you're an investigative journalist, so you're going to do some research about the
Right.
topic. Did you feel that there are sources out there that are credible, helpful for patients that you could rely on? Did you feel there's enough information that could help people who are diagnosed with cancer in
Yeah.
general and with lymphoma in particular?
I mean, the short of it is not enough is out there, right? Like Google is, people talk about don't go to Dr. Google, and I have a lot of comments about that actually. But it is vast and it is a dark hole we could drop into and spend a lot of time on. But in terms of what I was looking for, there was really nothing. I was looking for a human version of what life was going to look like after a cancer diagnosis. I will say that, of course, like there are amazing organizations like the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, right, that provide. I mean, they're a source of really credible information, and they also have lots of resources that they provide. There are organizations like Immerman Angels, a nonprofit that offers peer-to-peer support. And I was lucky to hear about that organization from a friend. But in terms of an online search right away, humanized, someone I feel like I can relate to, I don't feel alone, there really wasn't anything. I'll tell you what there is. Um, Facebook groups are really great because you can plug into a community and feel not alone. You can ask a question real time and get answers pretty real time. However, unfortunately, the people who are posting the most, of course, are people who are dealing with more. And so it skews the content in a way that may not represent what an actual patient experience will be. Meaning, I would go onto one of these groups, and then my husband would say, can you not read the feed? Because I would start crying. I would think if I'm going to, I ended up getting dose adjusted R-EPOC, so not R-CHOP. And I thought, why am I doing this, spending hundreds of hours undergoing chemotherapy, if this, what I'm reading about, is going to be the end result? And that's what so many of us are dealing with, right? We're already in a dark place because we hear cancer, we think of the movies, we think we're going to die, we think, you know, we don't know much. You know, luckily that the field is changing so quickly, and that's the gap of knowledge that we need to address and bridge. But I wanted to understand, and I didn't want to see the outdated statistics. So a lot of the things, if like you're, Googling lymphoma, what are you going to get? You're going to get a lot of jargon. You're going to get a lot of outdated numbers. And of course, they're outdated because that's how it works, but it's outdated. And, the overall survival rate or whatever percentages you're seeing, it does not give hope. And you've mentioned this before in different places, but, hope is important. And as a physician, from that perspective, I appreciate you saying that because I feel like there are different incentives. And I think for a lot of physicians, I don't want to speak for them, but it just, in my experience too, it feels like the incentives are don't give too much because I don't want to heighten and then let you down. And so I understand that. But from a patient perspective and even a care partner perspective, if we don't have hope, what's the point? Right? And hope doesn't mean false hope. And it doesn't mean sugar coated hope. It just means curating the right voices and the right information so people feel empowered. And that's so different. That's so different.
So speaking of social media, Google and social media, a couple of questions come to mind. Because I wanted to provide comments on Google and your experience there and whether patients should go there. But before you do that, you're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter, you do social media, you take a look at what physicians sometimes post.
Yeah.
And as you realize, sometimes there's just like contentious people, like, they're just arguing about certain things. And here you
Right.
are, the patient who is
Yeah.
watching this or reading this in
Yeah.
real time, and you are the one who's getting treatment. And I'm going to assume somebody out there says trashing Epoch R, which is the
Yeah.
regimen that you receive.
Yeah.
Do you think that physicians should be a little bit more, I guess, gentle in their arguments on social media because patients like yourself are actually reading?
Yeah. It's a great question because that's the age we're in, right? I will say, I thought about this because I've seen such brilliant people and having debates, and I think the debates are so necessary, and I think it's really great access. So my short answer is I think it's way better than it's not, right? It's net positive because it allows, I think, although I will say it's net positive for me where I am and as a patient advocate. So let me rewind a little bit. If I'm a patient going through it now, yeah, that would be really scary, right? And that would give me a lot of questions. And actually, this is a great time to sort of surface this. It's really difficult. One of the things I will tell you, so we have a reach now through our platform. Mostly it's the videos on YouTube, but we have a reach now of like the last 28 days, we have almost 3 million views. Organic, right? Nothing marketed, nothing paid in terms of marketing. And so we've gotten so many comments over the last few years. So there's so many views, so much engagement. And the number one thing that I've learned is about self-advocacy, and that people feel truly, truly conflicted in the doctor's office on whether they can say anything at all because they don't want to be labeled a problematic patient, right? And the reason why I bring this up is because it's huge. Even now, I don't want to be labeled as a problematic patient. I'm not sure if I'm asking one question too many. And so if I'm seeing as a patient, doctors who are very respected in their fields have an open debate about this, I'm now also feeling conflicted. What do I bring to my own doctor? I don't want him or her to feel insulted. I don't want it to follow my chart that I ask too many questions. And so that's just, it's a little bit like tangential, but it is so important in terms of this understanding from doctors that patients asking questions is not a bad thing. We just need to make sure that they're asking, the right questions. And how do we do that? But to support education for patients and their care partners.
So you do recommend patients being on social media?
I think that people learn differently, right? Not one size fits all. I think that people should be given the option. So I think that it's really great for doctors to be having debates on social media. But if I may, there is one thing that I've thought in seeing some of the things that I've seen, which is when you say trash epoch R, for instance, I have seen something where, and I think these are the best intentioned physicians, they have problems with certain maybe clinical trials or things that are happening, maybe treatments and different regimens. But I will say that I would just err on the side of what is giving patients options, and were patients included in terms of input in a clinical trial in the beginning. There may have been something where something on paper from a physician standpoint doesn't look good, but from a patient perspective might be something that they want, like quality of life associated, right? I mean, I'm not an expert, right? This is where the MDs are experts, but in terms of the way that conversations are being had, it's just really interesting from my vantage point as someone who's now a patient advocate and not in the thick of treatment. So anyway, for what it's worth.
I mean, to me is about, I'm curious about the impact on patients. Like I worry about the impact. Part of the reason I worry, and maybe I shouldn't, but that's why I want to hear your opinion, is because you can post anything you want, right? I mean, there's nothing here that is necessarily peer reviewed.
Right.
I could post anything. And maybe what I'm posting is correct, don't get me wrong, but maybe what I'm posting is wrong, and maybe it's exaggerated, whatever it is. But because I can post anything, nobody necessarily needs to I mean, some people fact check each other, but essentially, you could read what I post, and the impact of that on you is unclear. I agree with you. I think having debates is always better than not. And I think as long as the debates are civil and cordial is great. My worry is just, the impact on patients who are undergoing treatment. They really want to have a path. And I just worry that you add some uncertainty to their journey that is already kind of, turbulent.
Right. I really appreciate the spirit of the question, because it means you're really thoughtful about the patients and the care partners. What I will say is good or bad news, in terms of Twitter anyway, or X, most patients I know are not on there for the content. It's really more like the advocates and those who are adjacent to these conversations that are already happening. That being said, it is a really great question about the impact, but it's already out there, right? And I think the question is more, how can we ensure that there are platforms that are being powered in the right way and become big enough so that they capture that patient care partner population? Of course, selfishly, that's, the answer would be the patient story as one. I don't believe the patient story would be the only ever. But we are talking to people like you, right? We did talk to you for a story, trying to identify and curate the right voices and make sure that in terms of educational purposes, they're coming from people like experts such as yourself, but humanized in language. There's another bucket of content that we do that is about patient voices, which is the stories. And that really more addresses experiences, emotions. The way that I talk about the patient story is we invest in these conversations in depth with patients, care partners, and doctors, as well as nurses, medical care team members. And the first bucket, where most of our audience goes to, is they just want to know they're not alone. I've just been diagnosed, like me, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma at 31. It was 2 months from getting married. I was imagining a life with children, and then I'm told I have cancer. It is way too overwhelming. And it's already there, to your point, back in 2016, 2017, right? I was on Facebook and I was crying because it was out on social media, a lot of very unproductive, maybe counterproductive content. But I just wanted to know that I was not on my own. And that's what we're trying to do with these stories. You're not alone. Let's address that, help you feel like more emotionally secure. That's kind of an odd way of putting it, but just more empowered possibly. And then the second step is to shift people into, hey, we're having a program with these doctors to talk about some of the latest options that are coming out. Or maybe it's about, these are the most common side effects, and here are some tips from nurse practitioners or other APPs, or even doctors and other patients. And so I think it's just about investing in platforms that are really dedicated to this, to being really intentional about the way that we're providing the information. And then it is what it is. The social media space is a cowboy area, right? You can't really rein it in. Yeah.
As your doctors talk to you about side effects and things like that, did you feel that you got enough information about toxicities and side effects? And did they discuss fertility, for example? Was this something that you were concerned about?
Yeah, another great question. And the answer is no. I will caveat and preface with, I also understand that in these appointments with doctors, a lot of the times people are overwhelmed, and maybe doctors do say something about, a topic, and then we just don't remember because we're overwhelmed. So let me just preface with that. But that being said, for the most part, no, especially with things like fertility, that was something that I had to bring up. And I understand from my hemon's perspective, it's most important to address the lymphoma. So let's not wait. But what is life without the quality of life? I mean, and so I surfaced it, and I remember being told, look, I have patients who've gone through this treatment regimen, and they're fine. They had babies after. Sorry, that's not enough for me. You know what I mean? I need to at least explore what my options are. And so at that point, I think what would have been very effective would have been, this is my recommendation. I also understand this is very important, and here are some resources if you really want to explore that, right? At the end of the day, just give patients and care partners the options and then let them decide. And that's the best you can do as a physician, which, by the way, I know it's very difficult in that role. I can only imagine. And then on the other side of it, you asked about side effects. No. And I think this is another misalignment of incentives. Can't speak for all doctors, but I will say that having had, of course, hundreds of conversations and my own in terms of cancer patient experience, doctors seem to be very reluctant to share the possibilities. Now, on one hand, I understand maybe the thought is, I don't want to worry you. You may not experience those side effects. What if it's psychosomatic and you don't actually have that side effect, but then you think you do because I put it in your head, things like that. But what I will say is largely what I heard anyway, is I really wish that I had been told, here's a list of the most common side effects, and here are the things that we could do to either preempt them from manifesting or to try and tackle them as soon as possible, right? I remember I had like a million mouth sores after my first cycle. Actually, I had R-CHOP the first cycle because, I couldn't get a port in because of the mass was too large and all those things. Anyway, so I wanted to know what could I do, because I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't talk, I couldn't do anything. And later was told by the medical team, oh, hey, there's this, one medication might help, and maybe they didn't want to scare me, so they didn't talk about it, but I would have felt much more empowered given the options, or if the fear is, I don't want to put too much in a patient's head, ask them, hey, there are, sometimes there are more common side effects. Would you like to know them or would you not? I mean, just giving the option, I think, would be incredibly wonderful.
Yeah. It's hard for me to know whether the options are like the side effects are understated because the physician will make sure you get that curative therapy, or because they're stressed on time and they don't really have enough time. Like I can't really tell, but I agree with you. I think that we need to spend more time with patients, make sure they're educated about everything.
But I know this is your podcast. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Because you've got that physician, background and perspective. And so what do you think is happening the most frequently in the doctor's office that might lead to, patients being dissatisfied or even, I guess maybe what is the physician perspective here? Because I know there's a lot you have to weigh.
Yeah, look, I think physicians are different, but I think the most common denominator amongst all physicians is that they are stressed on time. So I think what is going on in the physician's office is that there, especially in oncologist's office, that they need time. There's little time and more patients. And you'll have to remember that conversations with patients with cancer are not really simple conversations. Whether it is a new diagnosis, whether it is a follow-up, whether it is treatment that is not working. I mean, oftentimes you look at the schedule and there's like 20 minutes for a return, an hour for a new patient. That's actually in a generous schedule. Oftentimes they give 15 minutes
Mm,
and 40 minutes. And then, if you're coming to see me for 15 minutes and things are okay, maybe we'll be able to do that. But frankly, if it's a longer conversations, we need more time. So then it becomes like a selective type of thing of what information they will deliver because they need to move on to the next patient. And they could punt this to advanced practice provider, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant, or one of their nurses to continue the type of discussion about adverse
mm,
events and about the side effects. But I think what is happening often, in my opinion, is that physicians are stressed on time. They are pulled in many directions, whether it is the teaching responsibilities, the administrative responsibilities, the clinical care, and then you have the logistical thing, put the orders in, sign the orders, pre-authorization, calling for a PET scan and things of that nature. That's what I really think is happening.
yeah.
And really the solution for that is you need more resources, more time. So potentially you could offload some of the low complexity patients to the nurses or and you just have to look at the schedule ahead of time and really
Yeah.
change the schedule in a way that if you know that you are going to spend 45 minutes with the patient and that patient has only a 10, 15-minute slot, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So planning ahead is important, but I don't know. I mean, I think that's going to be really critical to look into.
Yeah.
So so you got the treatment, and how did you, before we go into the how you tolerated, you talk about the mouth sores. Your fiance then was, and your family were obviously your caregivers or your support system.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in that because I feel that sometimes caregivers don't get the attention
Yeah.
that they deserve because the patient is the center of attention. But, being the
Right.
caregiver is not actually an easy thing. How did you feel they handled it? Did you ever feel you're a burden on them?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. Um, the topic of caregivers, care partners is a critical one. To your point, they're overlooked, but it becomes their life too, right after a diagnosis. I actually told my then fiance, I'd rather be in my shoes than yours because I think I would just be suffering so much seeing it from, the outside and feeling a lack of control. My mom actually moved in with us, at least for the week. She's very considerate. She's like, on the weekends, you guys have your own time. But she moved in because I needed that care. I was out of breath after walking, a few feet across a room at like 31, which was really hard. I became depressed. I lost my identity. So there were the physical problems and troubles, and then there were the emotional, mental difficulties. Um, and so she came in to really try and lift that burden for us, so that we could
Did you talk to somebody? Did you talk to a
support.
psychologist or a psychiatrist?
Yeah, I did. It's actually a really interesting topic. So at UCSF, they offer the, is it like psycho, onco, social support. I'll be really honest. I think it's a really wonderful service to have, but it's also difficult because you need to find someone you relate to, and it didn't resonate for me. And I also went to, by the way, they advertised non-Hodgkin lymphoma, or no, it's blood cancers patient group at UCSF, and I went one day in between my rounds and or in between my cycles, and I'm bald. I'm like feeling like really crappy and terrible. And I go in there, and there's, of course, because it's usually, people are much older. There's a group of much, much older people. Um, and a lot of them, I mean, they were lovely, but it felt so unrelatable. And a lot of them had already finished treatment for a long time and kind of become like this friend group almost. And I felt very isolated. So yes, I tried really hard to try and find support elsewhere. I ended up going to find a therapist outside of UCSF to try
Yeah.
and have conversations. But that is, mental health is such an important piece that is never really addressed, but a little bit more now, which is good.
And you know, society is not easy because they always want to feel strong. I mean, they don't really reward the weak. And let's face it, we do get weak when we are sick, whether we admit it or not, it's a different story. Um, you finished the treatment, you got the results that everything was fine. Did you believe it? How was your reaction? Did you feel comfortable, confident, or were you always anxious that it's going to come back? And how long was that? How long ago was that?
I still am anxious. Just to your point about mental, like ramifications. Just 2 nights ago, just to be very honest and vulnerable, I was, my husband and I were in bed reading, working, and all of a sudden I just started Googling second cancers again. It wasn't the first time, right? I mean, it's hello, like this chemotherapy that I saw nurses, put like tactical gear on, or hazmat suits, I should say, just to touch the bag, and then all this stuff was going into my body, and for so many hours. How could I not think that my body's really messed up after, right? So this whole issue of survivorship, which survivor meaning as soon as you're diagnosed, you're a survivor, is a really hard one. And anyway, so it's just to rewind back to your question. I mean, immediately after, no, and I was neutropenic for a long time, so I felt like something was still wrong with me for months after treatment ended. And then after I tried to heal, but you're never the same, or I won't speak for other people, but I was never the same. I'm still not, and I'm still dealing with it now. I'm very cognizant of the fact that some of it, or maybe a lot of it, is just a scar, maybe because I went through it already. And the thing that's not supposed to happen happened to me, and it happened to me when I was very young, or younger than the usual population. But I get emotional a lot, and I'm working in the space of cancer. And so it's always top of mind. And I lose people I know to
I know.
cancer. And so
That's
it's,
very tough.
yeah, yeah.
How long has it been since your last chemotherapy?
Oh, it's been years. This is the 7th year, actually. So,
And the reason I ask is because it's really important to put ourselves in the patient's shoes and be humble. 7 years later of a disease that we know we're probably cured, you remain anxious about a lot of things, and that's really important. Stephanie, when did you start thinking of building that platform, the patient story? Like, when
yeah,
did the idea come to you?
yeah.
And then how did you work towards executing on it?
Yeah, it was in the middle of chemotherapy. I'll send you a picture. I think my husband's in the picture, but it's a wall in our home, and I have post-it notes that are color coordinated for a website that I wanted to build, because I wanted to present a way of navigating people in a humanized way through what was so effed up, right? It was so difficult, and like I said so many times, in spite of the privilege of not having to worry about the financial toxicity, right? Of having support, physical, people around me, emotional, mental, and yet it was so difficult. So it was in the middle of chemo. I was in a terrible place, and even then was thinking, how do other people do it? If I am having trouble, how are people supposed to do this? And so that was the start of it.
And what did you do? I mean, like, do you just like build a website? And how do you get patient to even know about you, who you are, and the website? Like, how did you get started?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. It was, I think that this is what people want, but I'm N of one, so let me test it. And I had again time to be able to do this almost as a passion project. So I built a website, and I started with a woman I'd met who was nearby, same cancer type, did an interview at her house, put it up, transcribed it. It was just me for a long time. But what I noticed was it was up and to the right, up and to the right. And the numbers were proving to me in terms of engagement, time on page, that people
So you
wanted
put that
this.
like on YouTube, like you just sent it
No, no,
out.
it
Like
was
who
a
did you send
website.
it to?
I just built it on Squarespace because I'm not very tech savvy, but I just said, you know what, Squarespace makes it really easy. Let's see first if this is something. And if it gets more complicated, I'll migrate it to another platform, which I did later. And so I just built a website.
I
That's
mean,
it.
your website is interesting. It is called the patientstory.com. And for listeners and viewers, I mean, there are so much stuff in there. I mean, it's like about patient story, cancer hubs, patient events. I mean, there's so much information out there. But really, what is so unique about this, what I like about this website, is the patient stories, is the actual that you actually talk to real people that sometimes they don't get their voices heard, and you give them a platform. Um, do you only talk about lymphoma on your website, or is it allowed for anybody with cancer?
Yeah, so we're pan cancer, meaning we feature voices across all cancers. Although that's the thing, we're small and mighty and trying to grow because there's this huge, there's two sides to this. There are people who want to share their stories, so many that unfortunately we have to tell most people we can't right now. I mean, it's incredible the response that we've gotten. So many people want to share their story. And by the way, just as a personal note, even though I was like a TV news reporter, so I was on TV, I was incredibly, and still am, although to a lesser extent now, so private. I don't want people to know anything about my private life. And actually, my blog that I started it because I didn't want people to ask me the same question over and over again. So I wanted a place for close friends and family to go if they wanted to understand what I was going through or what was going on with my treatment. And then it evolved because I realized other people may be helped by knowing that I'm going through this. And so that was part of the genesis too of the platform. But it started there, and then people want to share their stories. And the flip side of that is look at the millions of views we're getting and how engaged people are staying on these videos. So yes, it's our website. It's also our YouTube channel. But there's two different populations here, or perspectives. It might be the same population, cancer patients and their family members. But one side, it's very cathartic to be able to release and share. And that's what I found. I was like, the more vulnerable I am, even if I really love being private, the more I leaned into it, the better I felt. It was liberating. And then the other part of it is people benefiting from hearing these voices, right? They're curated voices to be more representative of a median experience. And they're also not sugarcoating anything, but they're very authentic, but it's positive in the orientation, right? It's very solutions oriented. It's here's what empowered me. These are the kinds of pieces of content I think that we need more of. And so that's what we're investing in.
Why would you say no to a patient who's calling you to tell you the story? Is it like just like time, bandwidth, the space? Like, why would you say no?
Yeah. Yeah, it's mostly that. That's the unfortunate part. It's mostly time, bandwidth. The other part of it is in this age of TikTok and reels and short form content, people are always saying, oh, well, with video, people only have time for little bite-sized pieces. No, actually, our best performing pieces of content are long form. And so because we invest so much in these pieces of content and the way that we're publishing, it's very resource intensive. And so it's just a matter of bandwidth. The other part of it is that we also, again, back to the point of curation, everybody's story is important, but we also have a responsibility of making sure that if we're putting it out there, that we are curating experiences that are not going to be outliers, or if they're outliers, that the topic of that story is not a lymphoma story, but that this is how I dealt with a rare situation. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we have to be mindful of.
Do you vet the stories? Like, do you, like, if I call you and say, this is what's going on, like, is there any vetting process? You just take my word for it in terms of, I don't know, like, do you have to investigate whether I'm telling you the truth?
It's a very interesting question. As a journalist, of course, there's always something about vetting something. But when it comes to patient stories, we do pre-interviews just to have that conversation. But when you talk about like what is real and what isn't, unless it's someone talking about treatment or something that is specific to something medical in nature, it's really more about making sure that we're vetting for the voice, the tone, the demeanor. Are they going to come on and, people deserve spaces to vent, but that's not what we do, right? So we're vetting to make sure that it's not just an outlet for venting, that there's something that is, not positive in terms of the voice, but positive in terms of empowerment for the person who's watching, right? So that's the kind of vetting we do for patient stories. Now, for our educational programs and pieces that are more about medical things, we're always trying to feature the KOLs in that space would be doctors like yourself, right? People who are the respected voices, who are trained. And so in that way, we're vetting that kind of content.
You're very kind to call me as a KOL. I'm just a humble oncologist. But how many stories have you done? Like how many, do you
Oh,
count?
no, but we've done, oh gosh, thousands of pieces of content. Stories wise, in terms of patients, it's in the hundreds.
Okay.
And then videos, maybe a couple thousand. I don't know. We just had an update. I just forgot the numbers, but
Is it
yeah.
just you working on this? Do you have staff as
Oh no.
well?
Yes. Yeah. It was just me. And then now there is a team of us who, yeah, we have different, lanes that we manage. We have people focused on videos. We have people who are working on the website and on the programs. And so it is not just me anymore, thankfully.
Now, in order to fund this operation, do you have to take
Yeah.
external funding? Do you just self-fund it? Do you actually take, I don't know, like how do you fund the business?
Yeah, it's a great question too. It was self-funded in the beginning when we were much smaller. At the scope we're at now, I'm not self-funding it. So this is really interesting because I didn't know how this was going to be able to grow. And I was very wary of finding, like, I didn't want to do advertisements. So we don't do advertisements and we also do nothing branded. But what we do is we work in the unbranded sponsorship space. The thing that I knew always was that one of the things that really kind of pissed me off actually when I was researching things as a patient was that most people aren't looking for research papers anyway or journal, content in journals, but I wanted that and a lot of it would be hidden behind a paywall and I hated that. So one thing that I committed to was no matter what happened, whether it's content, programs or whatever, with the patient story, patients and care partners will never have to pay. And then the question was, who does? And so what I've been able to do is find really great supportive partners in industry like biopharma who work in the advocacy part of the organization. So the ones who are saying, yes, we understand that patient education is important. We also understand that we have to be hands off on these things and we'll support these programs. And so that's largely how we've been able to keep this going and not just keep this going, but grow it to more stories, more educational programs.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is trying to get the support while really maintaining autonomy and
Yeah.
making sure that you're able really to provide content that you feel your viewers and your stakeholders are interested in.
And one thing, and I keep talking about the privilege that I've had, and it's really just, it's just part of my story. But the one thing too with the patient story that I'm really excited by, let me rewind. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'm very risk averse. I'm also very afraid of failure, very like, the fixed mindset, growth mindset, very historically a fixed mindset, very typical, want an A+ student type of a person. So I never wanted to become an entrepreneur. The intersection that I arrived at was I'd gone through cancer, really felt that experience and how lonely it was and how difficult it could be. My journalism background in understanding storytelling, both in terms of just stories, as well as maybe that news component, right? With that journalist tap on of vetting information or trying to make sure that there's a wall between this and this. And the third was this ability to be able to do this without worrying about putting food on the table. I'm doing this really because I want to, not because I have to. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I have that, and so that is the runway that we have. We'll never ever chase anything unless it is helpful for patients and their families. And so that is something that really led me to this point of, I can't not do this. I
Do
really
you,
want to do this.
do you ever meet your patients face to face?
I have actually met, yes, I've met some patients face to face, been lucky enough to do that. I actually just had a conversation with a stage 4 lung cancer patient. We did her story, and we're going to do an update because it's been 10 years now with her stage 4. She's going through a tough time, having to make a lot of decisions, but she's in the area and I'm trying to make plans to meet her in person. Also, I recently was really honored to be able to speak at the local LLS blood cancer conference. So they invite all these doctors and patients have this incredible access with the doctors, but I was able to kind of open the event, and it was incredible. There were people who came up and said, the patient's story has really helped me through a really difficult time. And I did get emotional on site because that's all I wanted. Sometimes it's hard because I'm like, I'm not doing enough. This is not doing enough. And this is not fast enough. Why is this so slow? Why can't why can't we do better for people? And so my husband calls it going to church. The feedback, getting that feedback, we get it now every day digitally, but to meet people face to face, patients, care partners who benefited from the content that we're putting out was it was out of this world.
I have to say that probably one of the most emotional things that you would encounter in situations like this is when you lose a patient you've already met. And I know, are there stories you'd like to share with listeners and viewers that I'm sure you don't really forget anyone, but are there stories that just stayed with you that you think about every so often?
Absolutely. Beth is a woman I met who had myeloma, and she was many states away from me in Wyoming, but just an incredible, really beautiful woman. Wanted not only to share her story to help other people, but wanted to continue to figure out how to help other people, even as she was going through a really pretty tough experience. I know that in the field of myeloma, it's really rapidly shifting and it's really wonderful. But unfortunately for Beth, she did pass away. And I remember hearing about it from her husband and just being, it was one of the first times that I had, experienced this loss of someone I'd met through this work. And yeah, it was really tough. I cried, of course, and cried actually every time I thought about her for at least a month straight after, I think. I could now, it's emotional thinking about, and there's a lot of survivor's guilt too, to be honest. In thinking about people who didn't make it, and was I lucky? Why am I okay? I mean, I know there are different reasons, but it is a tough space to navigate sometimes, because I really put my heart into this work, and it's not really work. I put my heart into this, and it's a privilege to be able to tell people's stories.
Well, you're
and when
making a huge difference. I mean, you're really making a huge difference, in the lives of a lot of people. I'm just glad to know that you're able to get that feedback digitally, because oftentimes we don't, right? I mean, you do certain things, you hope they're going to actually help people, but you never know. But clearly you have enough metrics out there to tell you that what you're producing out there is resonating with people. And that's worth every effort you're putting into this.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's like I said, a privilege to be able to do it. And so
my last question is, you have 3 kids right now, but they came all after you finished your treatment.
Yeah.
They obviously see what you're doing. They look at your pictures from when you're getting treatment. How are you taking this and teaching your children life lessons that they really never experienced with you. They were not here.
Yeah, I will say they're too young now to know about anything. They will, touch my
I
port
see that.
scar
Yeah.
and my excisional biopsy scar and say like, "Mommy, what's that?" They're like 4.5, almost 3 in 4 months. So they're not,
I should have asked how old they were before I asked my question.
No. But it is something that is interesting, like kind of two worlds colliding when they just did that the other day. My middle son was like, "Mommy, what's this?" And I think, "Well, mommy was sick and they had to,
Yeah.
put something in there." And it's I will say one thing, which is the further out from treatment that I've got, the more I feel like I lose some of the lessons that I learned when I was going through treatment. And like life is really, truly unpredictable and short, and control is, in my perspective, is largely a little bit out of touch, like it's an illusion. But there are things that we can do to empower ourselves. And when my children remind me of what I went through in that way, that's so personal. I think about, oh yeah, this is what's important, not the little stresses that happen day to day.
Oh, for sure. Stephanie, what questions I should have asked you that I may have completely forgot to ask you before I let you go? And I'm very appreciative for your time.
No, and thank you for having me on. I think that if there's just one thing I could leave with, I think your audience is mostly typically, I mean, I think there's a wide range, right? But you have a lot of physicians, I think, probably who listen, and I hope they, I hope they listen to some of it. I know that I was talking to somebody else who's a physician and has some content, and he was saying how there's a huge dip, obviously, when there's patient, not obviously, but when there's like a patient focused conversation, there's a dip because I think sometimes we're also busy. And so until people understand why it's important to hear another perspective, I think we're going to continue to have that. I would just say, I know that physicians, I appreciate what you do. I can't imagine being an oncologist in particular, where you're dealing with terminal diagnoses and losing people. We get a lot of comments from patients who are really pissed off because they feel gaslighted, or that they had to advocate for themselves, or that doctors don't listen to them. And I know that it's so much more complex than that. Um, and I just hope that we can build this bridge more between that physician perspective and the patient perspective, because everybody benefits when we start to build that bridge. And so if there's anything that I can ever be helpful on with the patient perspective, I would love to. I think that you having me on, and patient platforms having more doctors on and humanizing those conversations is one step in the right direction.
Well, I think that's the most important piece. Frankly, I think there's science. Obviously, we have to deliver the right therapy and make the correct diagnosis. But at the end of the day, it's really about the human element. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what medicine is all about.
it is. And I know I just, one last thing actually on that note, maybe the one call to action that I would have for doctors might be, just let a patient ask one question more than you usually might, or something, um, or start off the appointment. I think there are a lot of things in terms of the way that conversations are being had, because to your earlier point, time is short, people are busy, it's on to the next, and that's not the doctor's fault, that's the system. But sometimes you save time actually by letting patients, you know, ask questions, or even just saying something to acknowledge that they may have questions, um, instead of trying to rush through, right? I just think that actually you might be surprised that for a lot of patients, what we feel is we just want to feel seen and heard and acknowledged. And it's, as soon as that is checked off, the conversation can actually move much more productively. So I don't know, just one piece of food for thought.
Stephanie, I'm very, very happy I got a chance to meet you. I'm very happy I got a chance to know you. I am amazed by how much you are doing and really helping a lot of patients and families. Congratulations on all of your success. And patients are lucky, truly, to have you by their side.
Thank you so much for having me on, and look forward to being able to chat more. Thanks for what you do as well.